We can also see anthrax in our omnivorous species, such as pigs, or potentially also carnivores. In pigs, we see oral and pharyngeal lesions most commonly. And this is presumably because this is how they become infected with Bacillus anthracis. So we get ulceration at the site of entry in the mouth or the throat, a regional lymphadenitis, and then an ulcerative and hemorrhagic enteritis. In carnivores, we rarely see clinical anthrax. But when disease does occur, it tends to manifest similarly as it does in pigs. And essentially, we get a septicemia when there's a massive exposure to the organism. So on the right here, you can see acute serohemorrhagic lymphadenitis, these cut sections of lymph nodes with these darkened red hemorrhagic lesions throughout. These lymph nodes were recovered from an animal who died of anthrax after being fed carcasses of other animals who had died of anthrax in a zoo. So a really, really massive exposure was required. We can also see anthrax in wildlife species. One particularly charismatic megafauna that is known to be susceptible to Bacillus anthracis is the hippopotamus. This is one particular wildlife outbreak that's been reported, and in this case, Cape buffalo were also affected. Most commonly in hippopotamus, the disease is recognized as a die-off. So a bunch of dead animals are found, and this is potentially a very serious public health concern for a couple of reasons. People can be certainly just exposed to the dead animals or exposed to the environment where they are and potentially is highly contaminated with the spores. But there's also the risk of consumption of Bacillus anthracis when eating the carcasses of these animals that are found dead. This is actually a really important reason that we want to ensure that only healthy animals and tissues from healthy animals ever enter the human food supply. From this outbreak, diagnosis was based on a combination of tests, including some really basic microbiology. So microscopy can be very, very helpful. Here you can see some photomicrographs. So in panel A here, we have a hematoxylin and eosin stained section of a large blood vessel where organisms can be seen. In B, this is a gram stain showing actually bacterial rods, which are visible within the bloodstream. And finally, immunohistochemistry to more specifically visualize the organism. If we zoom in a bit more on panel B, I think these rods really stand out quite nicely against the background. So here you can see this is a blood vessel. We've got some erythrocytes here, and here's our large Bacillus anthracis organisms. In people, anthrax has 4 distinct forms. Cutaneous is most common, and it results from direct contact with animal tissues or infectious material. Lesions tend to develop 2 to 5 days post-exposure. You can see an example of that here. And there's a mortality rate of 10 to 20% if untreated, so it can progress to systemic and fatal disease. Pulmonary anthrax is due to the inhalation of endospores and phagocytosis once those spores reach the lungs. Inside the macrophages, lethal toxin kills them, and we get hemorrhagic necrosis of the mediastinum. So a rapidly progressive, rapidly fatal disease with really only a 1 to 3 day incubation period and a very high mortality rate. Bacillus anthracis is a potential agent of bioterrorism or biowarfare, and I'll put links to a couple of interesting clips regarding this above. The oropharyngeal and gastrointestinal forms are associated with ingesting spores or vegetative cells. In GI disease, we see a 2 to 7 day incubation period, followed by fever, nausea, and bloody vomiting. In the oropharyngeal form, we see cervical and oral pain and edema, so of the mouth, head, and neck. Both of the forms will rapidly result in death from sepsis if untreated. On the right here, you can see tissues from a human case of gastrointestinal anthrax, and I think that you can appreciate just how edematous this tissue looks. It's very wet and glistening looking, which is really a hallmark of edema on pathological examination. Moving on from Bacillus anthracis to Bacillus cereus, this organism causes an acute self-limiting gastroenteritis in people. There's two sort of forms of Bacillus cereus foodborne illness in people. One is the emetic form, which results from ingesting the cerulide toxin. And this occurs sort of 1 to 6 hours following ingestion. It's relatively quick. The toxin is already present, and so it can act on the body shortly after being ingested. This disease is associated with a variety of foods, including rice, cream and milk products, pasta, and infant formula. And then we have a long incubation food poisoning, which is associated with more lower gastrointestinal signs. So watery diarrhea, nausea, and tenesmus, which is straining to defecate. This tends to be associated with meat, vegetables, cakes, sauces, and dairy. And just like Listeria monocytogenes, it's important to know that some Bacillus cereus strains can grow at very low temperatures, down to even 4 degrees Celsius. So growth in the fridge is possible, and refrigeration is perhaps not as protective as we might assume. In this study, researchers looked retrospectively at outbreaks of Bacillus cereus infections in France over a 7-year period and found that 747 of 911 cases were associated with starchy foods and vegetables. So not the typical types of foods that we generally associate with foodborne illness, things like meats and creamy dairy products. Paenibacillus larvae is a honeybee pathogen. And while it's not in the genus Bacillus, it is part of the same bacterial order. So it's related. It's a pathogen of honeybee larvae, and it causes American foul brood disease. It's thought to act, and its pathogenesis is due to a multiplicity of mechanisms. So it produces chitin-degrading enzymes, chitin being the structural component of insect exoskeletons. It also produces toxins that lead to intestinal epithelial cell death, and it has proteins on its surface that protect it from the insect immune system. Management of Paenibacillus larvae infected colonies relies on antibiotics and possibly probiotics for prevention. One thing that's really, really important is infection control, so preventing a colony from being infected in the first place. For anyone who's interested in learning more about apiculture, I've put a link to a video above of a student award lecture where he describes his research looking into the use of probiotics for the control of American foul brood disease. When you suspect that an animal has died of anthrax, do not perform a necropsy. The first thing you need to do is call the CFIA. Blood can be collected from the ear for visualization of bacillus cells within the bloodstream. And when doing a field investigation, particularly if you're working in a dusty environment like rural Saskatchewan, respiratory protection is essential. I would absolutely recommend that you wear probably an N95 mask. Non-anthracis species can be handled using standard precautions, so simple personal protective equipment, a lab coat, gloves, etc. You'll want to collect samples like milk or tissues from aborted fetuses in the case of abortions, and as usual, do not freeze your samples. In the lab, tissues suspected of having Bacillus anthracis must be worked with in a biosafety cabinet. Because this organism is biocontainment level 3, it's not something that we want to use propagative methods to detect and identify. And so direct microscopy can be really helpful, looking for encapsulated organisms in tissues. If we were to culture it, or if it was to be cultured in a higher containment lab, we're going to be looking for those non-hemolytic colonies on blood agar. Non-anthracis species are readily cultured and can be worked with safely. Here you can see what we're looking for, either on blood collected from the ear or tissues collected post-mortem. We have our cytological preparation here stained with methylene blue. And what I think you can appreciate is that we have these rod-shaped bacteria throughout the field, surrounded by these lucent areas. This is the capsule, and it's highly suggestive, along with the clinical history of Bacillus anthracis. As far as zoonotic or interspecies transmission, you definitely need to be concerned about this with anthrax. Bacillus anthracis is extremely difficult to get rid of from the environment. Current recommendations include removal of the top 20 centimeters of topsoil, disinfecting that soil and all contaminated equipment with formalin, and then burning or burying contaminated disposables along with carcasses. So it is a non-trivial matter. Because destroying those spores in the environment is so challenging and requires nasty chemicals like formalin, it's much, much better to prevent contamination in the first place. So do not perform necropsies. Personal protective equipment is absolutely essential. Gloves, lab coats, coveralls, eye protection. We really need to make sure that we are not cavalier with the safety of ourselves or the people working for us and with us. I think it's also important to know that when we're dealing with an outbreak situation, we can see unusual presentations. So from that 2006 outbreak, this is a case report of mastitis caused by Bacillus anthracis in a beef cow. In this animal, the affected quarter was swollen, darkened, and necrotic appearing. The milk was serosanguinous and watery. And on cytology of the milk, chains of rod-shaped bacteria could be seen. So although mastitis is not something we typically associate with anthrax, unusual things certainly can happen in outbreaks. With 806 cases, you're bound to see something unexpected. So in this context, you need to make sure to protect yourself and be vigilant. You may see disease presentations you're not expecting. For treatment, Bacillus anthracis is generally treated with high-dose penicillins or tetracyclines. We do have some intrinsic resistance among our Bacillus species. So Bacillus thuringiensis is intrinsically resistant to the penicillins, and Bacillus anthracis is resistant to second and third generation cephalosporins, as well as trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. Control measures, particularly in an outbreak setting, can include Bacillus anthracis vaccination and antimicrobial prophylaxis. You need to control the area. So keep scavengers out. You want to prevent animals from both opening up those carcasses and spreading spores around, and also becoming infected themselves, disposing of the carcasses appropriately, and preventing additional contamination of the environment. We have one question for self-assessment today.